Guys, welcome back to another video. We have some more interesting information in regards to the Xbox Activision Blizzard deal, and this is information from the appendices that have been summarized by IDAS and gives us some good info, some good insight as to what is going on here, and really gives us some information that will make you question even why anti-competitiveness and the monopoly talk, all that stuff is going on. So there's some charts here as well as some information about PlayStation and Call of Duty, which tells us really why they want this deal to be blocked. You can really see it other than the fact that they are Activision's, or at least one of Activision's biggest customers. They were their biggest customer in 2020, but they have an even sweeter deal that is talked about here. So let's start off here with some charts. This was pulled out, 3 tables here, pretty much just going over the shares of console hardware sales and value worldwide and within the UK. And basically when you're looking at these numbers, we don't see the actual billions of dollar numbers, but or the units specifically, that's redacted obviously, but we do see the percentages here. And although Microsoft and Xbox are very competitive in these markets worldwide as well as within the UK, less so in 2019, but improving going through 2020 and 2021, because obviously the Series X, Series S have been very successful. And 2019 was the end of the Xbox One generation, which wasn't a successful generation. Microsoft still is nowhere close to being dominant within the console sales, the console units, the console market compared to Sony and to Nintendo. We take a look right now in 2021. You can see all the other numbers, but I'll have the links in the description below if you want to look at them specifically. But right now we're in 2021. And in terms of the annual sales value, in terms of percentage worldwide, the numbers that we have here from the CMA provisional findings is that Microsoft is at 20 to 30%, SIE is 30 to 40%, and Nintendo is 40 to 50%. So Xbox still in last place in console hardware sales, meaning that this deal will obviously help them improve and help them grow, but it will in no way make them a monopoly in the console market. And it makes sense worldwide. You think about Japan, which is a massive market. Xbox has a presence there now. It's much better than the Xbox One generation. The Xbox 360 generation was decent for Xbox, but they'll never really be able to compete with Sony and with Nintendo in console sales. Maybe cloud gaming is going to come in and give them a big advantage, and maybe it's going to help them get more people into the ecosystem in Japan. But in terms of specifically consoles, it's always going to be very tough for them to be able to compete with Sony and Nintendo in Japan. But worldwide, you have North America, you have Europe and stuff where Xbox does better, but still dominated by PlayStation and Nintendo. Then we look at UK, which is what the CMA is, what they should be focusing on. That's their market. Xbox is actually in 2021, they were actually ahead of Nintendo in terms of the annual sales value. They were in second place at 30 to 40%, whereas Nintendo was 20 to 30%. And then Sony, the dominant one here in the UK, which is seemingly the one that they're looking to try to protect, which again doesn't make very much sense, 40 to 50%. And I guess what they're saying is that if this deal goes through, there's going to be some issues with competitiveness and Sony won't be on top anymore, essentially. And then table number 3 here is the console hardware by annual sales volume worldwide. In 2021, again, Microsoft in this category is far behind, 10 to 20%, SIE 30 to 40%, Nintendo 50 to 60%. Again, third place there. And these charts are showing they're in last place. This deal is going to help them grow. It's going to help them get better, get closer to first place, but it is in no way going to make them dominant or anti-competitive within the market. So we have these numbers here. This is the annual sales volume for 2019 to 2021 in the UK, and it's very close here. Microsoft 20 to 30, and then SIE and Nintendo 30 to 40%. And then finally, the shares of console subscription digital distribution in terms of consumer spend 2019 to 2021 worldwide. And here is where Microsoft and Xbox do look good and potentially even will be bigger and better than SIE and Nintendo once this deal goes through. Because as of right now, the total they say here for Microsoft is 40 to 50%, which is currently tied with SIE, which for Microsoft, that includes Game Pass Ultimate, Xbox Live Gold, and Game Pass Console. For PlayStation, that's PlayStation Now and PlayStation Plus. And then Nintendo is way behind at 5 to 10%, which is Nintendo Switch Online and their Nintendo Switch Online Plus expansion pack. But that 40 to 50% right now, Microsoft and Nintendo are competing hard for. Yes, Game Pass, I think objectively, if you look at it, is a far better service than PlayStation Plus. It has better games, has the first party stuff, and Game Pass alone gives you that great cloud gaming service. PlayStation Plus doesn't have as many great games, doesn't have the first party stuff, and their cloud stuff isn't nearly as good as Xbox Cloud Gaming. But because there's such a huge user base within PlayStation already, and people that are just still subscribed to PlayStation Plus Essential where they haven't actually upgraded, they're head to head in terms of that subscription percentage. Activision Blizzard goes through, you will probably see Xbox, Microsoft move above PlayStation with their overall percentage gain, maybe even over 50% of the market. And maybe that's why they're saying, oh, this is anti-competitive and stuff like that. But again, still doesn't make too much sense because PlayStation has that opportunity to compete in order to grow their subscription service. And we've talked about this in previous videos. Microsoft just does it better than everyone when it comes to the subscription gaming model, when it comes to cloud gaming. And there are other massive companies that have tried to do it. They can't do it as good. They haven't been able to do it as good. Google Stadia, even Amazon Luna out there trying to get into it. PlayStation with their cloud gaming and their subscription, they just haven't done it as good as Xbox. And that's why there's competition. They have the opportunity to try to do it as good as them. They just haven't been able to. And with Activision Blizzard going over, you add those games into the subscription service, they're already ahead. They're going to be even further ahead. So that is one of the main things that the CMA here is focusing on. But again, in no way I think it makes it anti-competitive. It just means that PlayStation is going to have to work harder to compete with the subscription ecosystem model. Now, those are the numbers, but here's where things get interesting. There's some more info here about cloud gaming and the deal that PlayStation specifically has with Call of Duty. I'll talk about that one first because I think this is the biggest thing here, and it really shows that they were just getting huge gains from Activision and huge gains from Call of Duty. It says here, Sony receives a discounted margin for every Call of Duty sale, but they don't expect that to remain post-merger, which of course it wouldn't. And that's why they're pissed that they don't want this deal to go through. It says SIE applied a third-party margin, redacted percentage, for Call of Duty sales on PlayStation. SIE currently receives a margin of a redacted percentage on Call of Duty sales on PlayStation. SIE stated that it did not believe that the current discounted margin would remain post-merger, given their main competitor will control ABK's content. SIE carried out a sensitivity analysis in which it assumed SIE receives a margin on COD sales. It estimated that the critical switching rate at which it becomes profitable for the merged entity to foreclose SIE increases from this, again, redacted percentage to a redacted percentage. So basically, at top of that 30% that they were making off of the PlayStation Store, they were making even more based off of this deal that they were making, and that's going to be gone away once this deal goes through. So that's the way I'm reading what that says there. And this is extremely important, not because it's going to make Xbox and Microsoft a dominant player in the market that will make them a monopoly, but for PlayStation, this increases their revenue so much that every time they put out those financial reports for their shareholders, it satisfies the shareholders. It increases their stock price. It makes people believe that they are growing and doing extremely well. You take that away going forward, they're not going to be able to have as high revenues. Stock price is probably going to fall. Investors are going to be angry. And that's, at the end of the day, what it is. It isn't about competition. It isn't about Sony wanting to continue to, or feeling like that Microsoft is going to become a monopoly and they're going to be foreclosed. What it is, in my opinion, is their revenue numbers are going to be less, and they're going to have to do other things in order to increase those revenue numbers. And it's going to hurt their stock price. It's going to hurt their perception from the shareholders, all of that type of stuff. Their investors are going to be pissed off. And that's why they don't want this deal to go through. I mean, I'm just speculating here, so I could be completely wrong, but I think that's going to be the most important thing there for Sony. And yeah, that's a huge deal. And unless maybe Microsoft is going to say, in order to pass this deal, they will still work with Sony and do some sort of deal like this, but that would just make zero sense when it's your direct competitor. So Sony's going to have to come up with something else to make up for that revenue loss that they're going to be losing on this type of stuff with Call of Duty. And we'll see what they do. I'm sure they can do. I mean, they have so many IPs. They have They have great minds at Sony. Let's not be ridiculous here. They're a good company in terms of getting people to go out and buy their consoles. They have huge top of mind marketing for most people. When they think of video games, they think of PlayStation, they think of Sony probably first when compared to the amount of people that think of Xbox first. So they've done a great job there. They obviously can go out and continue to do stuff to increase their business and increase their revenues on their quarterly basis. All right, so the next section, 2 sections here, a little bit less interesting, but the first part here on page D5 talks about the survey that they did with asking gamers where they would play or if they would switch consoles if Call of Duty wasn't there. And as we know, the CMA came up with a 24% number of people who would switch away from PlayStation if Call of Duty left. And they're arguing here that this survey was done during the hype time, the marketing time of Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, so that could have skewed the results. But the CMA is pushing back on that, saying that that isn't true, that they did it in a way that they didn't focus on Call of Duty, they focused more on console ownership, and that they had to do it within these time constraints. So that's why they did this, but it didn't skew the results enough for these results not to be fair, I guess you could say. You remember there's 24% that said that they would switch in the UK, and they said that that could be anti-competitive or that could affect the market in a way that they would be concerned about. But then you remember when Chile did their results, they used the methodology that the CMA used or uses to do these surveys, and they came up with a 22% number, and they said that was not an issue. So there's a huge difference in these markets authorities in the way that they think about this thing. Chile said 22% wouldn't make this deal anti-competitive. The CMA said 24% would be something to be of concern. So take that for what you will, but the percentage in terms of the competition between Microsoft and Sony, from the numbers that I pulled up on my video when we talked about this, it was very close. That 24% could potentially push Xbox ahead of PlayStation. And maybe that's why I'm saying they were saying that this could make it anti-competitive, but that doesn't really make sense. It almost seemed like they were trying to protect Sony's lead. I'm not going to say that that's what they're trying to do. When you look at those numbers, it has to make you ask that question. And then finally, in this last section here on page F1, they talk about what drives people's PC OS decision. And they come to the conclusion that gaming is not a big determining factor, and Activision games are even less of a factor for people to choose whether they get Windows, whether they get Mac, whether they get Linux. As gaming is a small part of what people do on PCs, and then Activision games are an even smaller percentage and part of what people use their computers for. So take that as what you will, but PCOS isn't determined by what games they're going to play and Activision. People are going to choose Mac, Linux, or Windows depending on the other types of things that they are doing on their computers. Now we have this section here, talks about Nintendo, talks about cloud gaming, and we got some information here about Nintendo's cloud gaming service, which is only available on the Nintendo Switch device. And then they say "and redacted," meaning that they're probably, I think in my opinion, talking about the next Nintendo console, the next Nintendo Switch, Nintendo Switch 2, Nintendo Switch Pro, that's been rumored forever and hasn't been announced, maybe next year. So Nintendo Switch Online and cloud gaming services are going to be available going forward on Nintendo platforms, which is cool that they even recognize and mention that there is a new Nintendo Switch coming. I'm guessing it's well in development. They're just waiting to announce this thing, but the Switch still selling extremely well, with Tears of the Kingdom coming out, which is going to probably just shatter sales on the current platform, on the current device. They don't need to put out that new Nintendo Switch yet. Until it starts to slow down, then they will announce it, and then they will put out the Switch 2, which I hope they do soon, because the games on the Switch are awesome, but they could definitely benefit from more powerful hardware. Next part here, future cloud gaming providers. Some cloud gaming services, notably Amazon Luna, are not fully launched. Furthermore, other potential providers have not yet entered. And then they have other examples there. It is hard to guess who would like to pay for cloud gaming without subscription services. They say here, many cloud gaming services are contained within multi-game subscription services such as Xbox Game Pass Ultimate or PlayStation Plus Premium. In such cases, it is hard to determine how much customers would pay for the cloud gaming services without the multi-game subscription. And you could take a look at Google Stadia. That's an example that they shut down. That was only cloud gaming, but the offerings there weren't nearly as good as Xbox Game Pass. I mean, I don't believe that. I mean, they had good service in terms of the actual streaming itself, the resolutions that they were able to get. But I think it was one of those services where it just didn't hit for enough people. It just wasn't competitive to Xbox Game Pass, to Xbox Cloud Gaming, when you're paying essentially around the same amount for getting access to Game Pass and Cloud Gaming at the same time with Xbox Game Pass Ultimate. Why would you go over to Google Stadia? And I think if Xbox had a tier where it was just Xbox Cloud Gaming, people would pay for it with the content that's in there if they just want to play on their phone. And if you've tested it out, it works great. So that would be interesting to see the percentage of people that just pay for Xbox Cloud Gaming over Xbox Game Pass Ultimate. And I think that's something that they want to test out and push out more in different parts of the world, where Xbox just isn't as popular, where the console isn't as popular, getting people into cloud gaming only so they're in the ecosystem. Next up, they talk about PlayStation Cloud Gaming and how their share have been overestimated in 2021 and 2022. And basically, which is, I agree, it's because you're summing up everything. People subscribe to PlayStation Plus and PlayStation Now who had used SIE's cloud service in that month. They say this means a cloud gaming user who subscribed to both PlayStation Plus and PlayStation Now was double counted. This only applies to the figures between January 2020 and July 2022, when PlayStation Now was discontinued. This likely still means that PlayStation Cloud Gaming shares is overestimated both in 2021 and in 2022. And of course, it will be overestimated. And I mean, at the end of the day, I'm not sure how they're going to do their numbers, but if you're just subscribed to PlayStation Plus Essential, are they going to count that into just one whole number? Because as a PlayStation Plus subscriber, where some people get the access to the cloud gaming and others don't. Then they go on here and say the hypothetical scenarios presented in the survey were difficult to design and the interpretation should be cautious. Nonetheless, this was a difficult subject to tackle in a merger survey questionnaire with an audience of console gamers, some of who had played Call of Duty much less frequently or less recently than others, and whose past and potential future purchasing behaviors as a group included a high level of variability. We also recognize that the hypothetical scenarios we presented to elicit responses were of necessity more difficult to design robustly than in many other merger surveys. We are therefore cautious in our interpretations of those surveys findings that rely on stated behaviors in response to hypothetical scenarios presented to respondents. And I think that part there is like pretty important for the fact that people's buying behaviors of Call of Duty, of video games, change all the time. One generation they're on PlayStation, the next generation they're on Xbox, and it's irrelevant to whether this deal was going through or not. You just take a look at history. I mean, people switch all the time depending on what console has just the better offerings right at launch. And the console offerings evolve over an entire generation. So maybe somebody didn't buy an Xbox right at launch, but 2 or 3 years down the road, the offerings improve, they go out and buy an Xbox. That happened probably with a lot of people in the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 generation. I think that's probably one of the big ones where everyone got 360 at launch and the PS3 wasn't good for a number of years. And then as the PS3 Slim came out, many years down the road, the PlayStation 3 caught up to the 360 and did decent numbers for that console generation where it looked really bad at the start. So buying behavior based off of one survey, people aren't going to stay just on one platform all the time. And then finally, the last part, they're just really talking about the response rate to the survey where it achieved 4.4%, but they weren't able to achieve at least a 5%, which is good practice for these surveys. So some interesting stuff there in terms of the survey from gamers, people saying they're switching from PlayStation to Xbox if Call of Duty leaves, the interpretation of the results. And I think the biggest one here is on page E6. This deal that PlayStation has right now with Activision that is probably going to go away. And that's massive for them, for the revenues, for the reporting, all of that type of stuff. So let me know what you guys think about all this. I'm going to leave it here. And what do you think about the information from these charts, as well as information from the surveys and the PlayStation deal with Call of Duty and Activision? If you enjoyed this video, hit that thumbs up. If you're new here, hit that subscribe. I'll catch you guys in the next video.
Bye.